Some files in a detective's cabinet aren't just cold. They're frozen solid. They sit there year after year, the paper turning brittle, the ink fading, their silence screaming louder than any fresh case with flashing lights and yellow tape. For me, for 27 long years, that frozen file belonged to the Miller family. Tom, Elizabeth, and their little 8-year-old daughter, Lily. They didn't just go missing, they evaporated. One minute, they were part of the fabric of our town, Charleston, West Virginia, and the next, they were just a ghost story parents told their kids to keep them from wandering off. And I was the detective who was supposed to find them. A promise I made to their family, a promise I made to myself, that turned into the heaviest weight I've ever had to carry. Welcome to Detected Cold Cases, your daily dive into the world of unsolved mysteries, forgotten crimes, and chilling cases that still haunt investigators. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new revelation. My name is Miles Corbin, and back in 1997, I was a detective with more ambition than experience. I saw the world in black and white, good guys and bad guys. I believed every puzzle had a solution. You just had to find the right key. The Miller case taught me that some locks are rusted shut, and some keys are lost to time itself. The Millers were what you'd call the perfect picture of a small-town family. Tom was a mechanic, one of the best in the county. He had this garage just off the highway, always smelled of oil and coffee. He was an honest man, grease under his fingernails, but a smile that could disarm anyone. People trusted Tom with their cars, which is like trusting him with a piece of their life. His wife, Elizabeth, was a librarian at the city library. She was quiet, gentle, the kind of woman who seemed to carry a little bubble of peace around with her. She knew the name of every kid who came in for story time. And then there was Lily. Lily was the heart of their world. She had her father's bright eyes and her mother's sweet nature. I remember seeing her at the town fair just a month before they disappeared, a whirlwind of blonde pigtails and cotton candy, laughing as Tom tried to win her a giant stuffed bear. They were happy. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. That October of '97, they planned a simple road trip. Just a long weekend to drive through the mountains, to see the fall colors. West Virginia in October is something special. The hills look like they're on fire, a riot of red, orange, and gold. It's the kind of beauty that makes you feel small and hopeful all at once. They packed up their green 1995 Ford Explorer, a vehicle Tom kept in perfect condition, of course. Elizabeth's sister, Clara, told me they had packed sandwiches and a thermos of hot chocolate. Lily had her favorite blanket and a stack of books from the library. It was meant to be a simple, perfect family memory in the making. They left on a Friday morning. The plan was to drive a scenic loop and be back Sunday night, in time for Lily to get to school on Monday. The last confirmed sighting was at a gas station about 60 miles east of Charleston. The attendant, a kid barely out of high school, remembered them because Tom had given him a $5 tip for cleaning the windshield, which nobody ever did. He said they were all smiling. Lily was in the back seat, waving at him as they pulled out. That was it. That was the moment the earth just seemed to open up and swallow them whole. Sunday night came and went. No call. No sign of the green Explorer in their driveway. Clara, Elizabeth's sister, started to worry. She knew Elizabeth. Elizabeth was a planner. If they were going to be late, even by an hour, she would have called from a payphone. By Monday morning, the worry had turned into a cold, sharp-edged panic. She called the state police, and the report landed on my desk. In missing persons cases, the first 48 hours are everything. We threw everything we had at it. We found their Ford Explorer on Tuesday afternoon. It was parked on the shoulder of a secluded mountain road, the kind of place you only go if you're looking for a trail to hike or a quiet place to think. But the discovery just made everything stranger. The car was locked. Tom's wallet was on the dashboard. Elizabeth's purse was on the passenger seat. Their suitcases were still in the back. A half-eaten bag of potato chips and Lily's blanket were on the back seat. The keys were still in the ignition. It was as if they had just stopped the car, locked the doors from the inside, and stepped out into the woods for a short walk, intending to come right back. But there were no footprints. The ground was covered in a thick blanket of damp leaves. But there was no trail, no sign of a struggle, nothing to indicate which direction they went or why they left the car in the first place. That's when the real search began. It was one of the biggest search and rescue operations in the state's history. We had hundreds of volunteers combing those woods, shoulder to shoulder. We had dog teams, their barks echoing through the silent autumn trees. We had helicopters chopping the air overhead, their crews scanning the endless canopy of color for any sign of life, a piece of clothing, anything. We found nothing, not a single thread. It was like they had become ghosts. The dogs couldn't pick up a scent trail that led more than 20 feet from the car before it just vanished. The days turned into weeks. The bright autumn leaves fell, leaving the trees bare and skeletal. The first snow of winter arrived, blanketing the mountains in a sterile white, and we had to call off the major search. You can't imagine the kind of emptiness that follows a search like that. You're left with a file full of questions and a family full of grief, so profound it feels like a physical presence in the room. I had to sit with Clara and Elizabeth's parents and tell them we had done everything we could. Looking into their eyes was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The hope draining away, replaced by a hollow look of despair. The community was terrified. Theories flew around like crows. People are uncomfortable with a vacuum, with a question that has no answer, so they start inventing their own. Some said Tom had gotten into trouble with the wrong people, that it was a mob hit, which made no sense. Tom Miller didn't have a single enemy. Others whispered that he and Elizabeth had planned it, that they ran away to start a new life. But why? And why leave everything behind, their wallets, their car? And you never ever believed that a mother like Elizabeth would willingly abandon her family or take her child into a dangerous, unknown future. The most common theory, the one we leaned on in the official report, was a tragic accident. Maybe they had wandered off the road, gotten lost, and succumbed to the elements. The mountains are unforgiving. It can get cold fast. It's easy to get disoriented. But then where were they? We searched every cave, every ravine, every creek bed for miles. 3 people don't just disappear without a trace. Not even in the dense woods of West Virginia. The case went cold, but it never left me. Every October, when the leaves started to turn, I'd pull out the Miller file. I'd stare at their smiling faces in the family portrait we had. Tom with his arm around Elizabeth, Lily sitting on his lap. I'd go over the maps, the witness statements, the forensic reports on the car that told us nothing. I'd drive out to that lonely stretch of road where the Explorer was found and just stand there, listening to the wind in the trees, hoping the forest would give up its secret. But it never did. Years passed. I got older. My hair got grayer. I solved other cases, put other bad guys away. I saw technology change the world of policing in ways I could have never imagined in 1997. Cell phones, DNA databases, digital forensics. But none of it helped the Millers. Their case was a relic from an analog world. The trail wasn't just cold. It was buried under decades of dead ends and silence. The Miller house was sold. Clara moved away. Life, for everyone else, went on. But for me, that file stayed on my desk, a constant, silent reminder of my biggest failure. I kept that promise to their family, even if only in my own mind. I never stopped looking. Then came the spring of 2024, 27 years after the Millers vanished. I was 3 months from retirement, packing up my office, deciding which old files to send to the archives. The phone on my desk rang. It was a call from the sheriff's office in a neighboring county. A couple of teenagers, urban explorers they call themselves, had been hiking deep in the state forest, miles from any official trail. They were looking for an old, abandoned hunting cabin that was rumored to be haunted. They found it, a dilapidated old shack slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Curious, they went inside. Under a pile of rotten floorboards, they found a small, water-damaged cardboard box. They thought they'd found some kind of treasure. They took the box, and to their credit, they turned it in to the authorities. Inside, among some moldy magazines and a rusted can opener, was a piece of electronic junk. It was a handheld GPS unit, big, bulky, with a tiny monochrome screen. The deputy who called me knew I was the old guy on the force, the one who worked cases before everyone had a supercomputer in their pocket. He thought I might recognize it. He sent me a photo. My heart just about stopped. It was a Magellan GPS 3000, a popular model for hikers and outdoorsmen back in the mid-90s. I remembered from the original file that Tom Miller was a gadget guy. He loved technology. His sister-in-law, Clara, had mentioned he just bought a fancy new GPS for their trip, something he was very excited about. We'd never found it. We assumed it was with them when they disappeared. Could this be it? After 27 years? It was the longest of long shots. The device was corroded. It looked like it hadn't seen a fresh battery in a generation. Getting any data off of it seemed impossible. But for the first time in over 2 decades, I felt a flicker of something. It wasn't quite hope. It was more like a jolt of electricity, a spark in the dark. I drove the 2 hours to the other county myself to pick it up. I held it in my hands. It felt heavy, not just with its own weight, but with the weight of all those years of silence. Finding someone who could even attempt to extract data from a 27-year-old GPS unit was a challenge in itself. Most of the new tech guys in the forensics lab just laughed. They were used to pulling data from iPhones, not museum pieces. But I remembered a guy, a retired engineer named Ben, who used to consult for us on old electronics cases. He lived in a house full of wires and circuit boards and smelled faintly of soldering flux. He was a wizard with obsolete tech. I found him, and he looked at the Magellan like it was a long-lost friend. "Wow," he said, turning it over in his hands. "Haven't seen one of these in a dog's age. The batteries will have leaked acid everywhere. The memory chip is probably fried." But he saw the look in my eyes. "Leave it with me, Miles. I'll see what I can do." For a week, I heard nothing. I tried to manage my expectations. It was probably nothing. A coincidence. Just some old hiker's lost gadget. But I couldn't shake the feeling. On the 8th day, Ben called. His voice was crackling with excitement. "You're not going to believe this, Miles. I had to basically rebuild the power supply, but I got it to boot up. The onboard memory was protected. I got it. I got the log." My hand was shaking as I drove to his workshop. He had the data displayed on his computer monitor. It was a breadcrumb trail, a series of coordinates logged every few minutes, tracking a journey. The log started on that Friday morning in October 1997, right near the Miller's house in Charleston. It tracked their route perfectly along the highway, matching the exact path we knew they had taken. It showed them stopping at the gas station where they were last seen. My pulse was hammering in my ears. Then, the trail did something we never knew. A few miles past the gas station, the coordinates veered off the main highway onto a series of smaller back roads. It continued for about 10 miles, then turned onto a dirt track, a road that wasn't on any of our old maps. The trail went deep into the forest, far deeper than where their explorer was found. And then it stopped. A final single waypoint, blinking on Ben's screen. The GPS had been turned off at that location. It was a coordinate in the middle of a dense, rugged section of the National Forest, an area so remote it hadn't been part of our original grid search because it was considered almost inaccessible. "What is this place, Ben?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He pulled up a modern satellite map and cross-referenced the coordinates. "According to this," he said, pointing to the screen, "it's nothing. Just trees. But look at this old survey map from the 80s. He switched screens. There used to be an old mining operation back in these hills. A few small, independent coal mines. They were all shut down and supposedly sealed up decades ago. This final point, it's right on top of what used to be the entrance to an old mine shaft called Black Creek No. 4. A cold dread washed over me. We assembled a new team. This time, it wasn't a massive public search. It was a small, quiet team of experienced troopers and a forensics unit. We drove as far as we could, then hiked the rest of the way, using a modern GPS to guide us to the 27-year-old coordinates. The forest was thick, the terrain brutal. It was a place you would never, ever stumble upon by accident. After 2 hours of hacking through underbrush, we found it. There was no obvious mine entrance. It had been sealed, just as the record said. But not by a government agency. The entrance was covered by a massive pile of rocks and dirt that looked like a natural rockslide. But something about it felt wrong. It was too neat, too deliberate. It took a team with heavy equipment 2 days to clear the entrance. What we found inside, it's a sight that will never leave me. It wasn't a mine shaft. It was a small, hidden cellar dug into the hillside, probably used for storing equipment or explosives back when the mine was active. And inside we found them, the Miller family. It was a makeshift tomb. They were lying together, almost as if they were sleeping. The dry, cold air of the cellar had preserved them in a way that was both horrifying and, in a strange way, peaceful. Lily was between her parents, her head resting on her mother's arm. Her favorite blanket was still wrapped around her. The initial examination at the scene told us what we needed to know. This was no accident. This was not a case of getting lost in the woods. They had been murdered. The forensic pathologist later confirmed that all 3 of them had died from blunt force trauma to the head. They had been attacked, killed, and then carefully placed in this hidden cellar, and the entrance was deliberately collapsed to hide them from the world. They were meant to stay lost forever. The discovery of the bodies was a seismic shock to the community, reopening a wound that had never truly healed. But it also gave us our first real question in 27 years. Who would do this? Who could be capable of such a monstrous act? The GPS gave us the where, but it didn't give us the who. Or so we thought. The final waypoint wasn't just a random spot in the woods. This piece of land, this forgotten mine, it had to belong to someone. Back at the office, I spent days buried in the county archives, digging through dusty property records from the 1990s. And I found it. In 1997, the parcel of land that included the old Black Creek No. 4 mine was owned by a local family. It had been in their family for generations. And the name on the deed sent a jolt through my entire body. It was a name I recognized from the original case file. A name that had been dismissed almost immediately. Gary Henson. Gary. Everyone in town knew Gary. In 1997, he was a quiet, helpful man in his late 40s. A local handyman. He was one of Tom Miller's friends. They were in the same fishing club. Gary had even helped Tom do some work on the Ford Explorer just a week before their trip. I pulled his original witness statement. We talked to him, of course, as we had talked to all of their friends and family. He said he was devastated. He told us he'd been on a solo hunting trip in another part of the state that entire weekend. He had a permit to prove it. A few people vaguely remembered seeing his truck heading out of town. His alibi seemed solid. He was a friend. He was grieving. We had no reason to suspect him. We were looking for a monster, a stranger lurking in the woods, not the friendly neighbor who waved to you at the grocery store. Now, 27 years later, Gary Henson was an old man. In his mid-70s, a respected community elder. He still lived in the same small house. He'd never married, never had kids. He lived a quiet, solitary life. The idea that he could be a killer seemed insane. But the GPS didn't lie. Tom Miller, a man meticulous about his gadgets, had tracked his final journey. And that journey ended on Gary Henson's family property, in a place only someone with intimate knowledge of the land would know existed. They hadn't gotten lost. They had been led there. We needed more than just a property deed. We started digging into Gary's life, both then and now. And we found the motive, buried just as deep as the Millers' bodies. It wasn't some grand conspiracy. It was something small and pathetic and deeply human. Greed. We discovered that Tom Miller had loaned Gary a significant amount of money a few months before the trip. It was an off-the-books loan, a handshake deal between friends to help Gary start a small business. But the business failed. Gary was broke, and Tom, as kind as he was, needed the money back. We found a letter tucked away in Tom's old files at his garage, where he politely but firmly asked Gary to start making payments. The letter was dated 2 days before the Millers left on their trip. Gary was desperate. He had no way to repay the debt, and he was about to be exposed as a failure to his friend and to the community. The pieces started to fall into place. That weekend, Gary hadn't gone on a hunting trip. He'd used it as a cover. He knew the Millers were heading into the mountains. He called them, or maybe even met them on the road. He probably told them he knew a shortcut, a secret scenic overlook that was just breathtaking in the fall. A place he knew from his childhood. Tom and Elizabeth trusted him. Why wouldn't they? He was their friend. Tom, the gadget lover, would have followed along, letting his new GPS track their little adventure. Gary led them down that dirt road, to that isolated spot. And there, where no one could see or hear, his desperation boiled over into unimaginable violence. He probably only meant to confront Tom, to argue, to beg for more time. But the argument escalated. He attacked Tom, and Elizabeth and little Lily were witnesses. In his panic, he did the unthinkable to silence them, too. Armed with this, we went to get him. I was the one who knocked on his door. When he opened it, he looked frail, a stooped old man with watery eyes. He looked at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of something. Not recognition of me, but of the ghost I represented. He denied everything at first, of course. His voice was thin and reedy, full of indignation. He claimed he hadn't seen the Millers in a week before they left. He stuck to his hunting trip story. He was a good liar. He'd had 27 years of practice. We took him to the station. We sat him in a sterile interview room. I laid a single photograph on the table in front of him. It wasn't of the Millers. It was a picture of the Magellan GPS 3000. He stared at it, confused. "What's this?" he asked. "That," I said, my voice low and steady, "is Tom Miller's GPS. And it told us its story. It told us where you took them, Gary. It told us about the old cellar on your family's land." The color drained from his face. His carefully constructed wall of lies, the one that had stood for nearly 3 decades, crumbled into dust. He just broke. He started sobbing, these horrible, racking sobs of a man whose soul had been rotting from the inside out for half his life. And then he confessed. He told us everything. How the argument about the money had turned violent. How he'd hit Tom with a tire iron he kept in his truck. How Elizabeth had screamed, and he had panicked. He said he couldn't even look at Lily. He just closed his eyes. He talked about how he'd put them in the cellar, how he'd spent hours by himself, using his truck to push rocks and dirt over the entrance, burying his terrible secret. He said he'd gone home, and for 27 years, every single day, he expected a knock on the door. A knock that never came, until now. The arrest of Gary Henson sent a shockwave through Charleston that was bigger than the one in 1997. The man they all knew as quiet, harmless old man Henson, the man who volunteered at the church bake sale, was a monster. He had lived among them, sharing their grief, shaking his head at the terrible tragedy, all while knowing he was the cause of it. He had hidden in plain sight, protected by the simple, unbelievable horror of his crime. No one could ever imagine that a friend could be capable of such evil. For me, closing the Miller case wasn't a celebration. There's no victory in uncovering that much pain. But it was a release. It was the fulfillment of a promise made a lifetime ago. We were able to give the Millers a proper burial, to finally bring them home. Clara was there, an old woman herself now, her hair as white as snow. She held my hand, and for the first time, she cried tears not of despair, but of closure. Secrets can't stay buried forever. Sometimes, all it takes is a forgotten signal from the past, a tiny electronic voice trapped in a box, to bring the truth screaming into the light. The Miller family story is a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters are often the ones who wear familiar faces. If their story has moved you, and you believe that no victim should ever be forgotten, then hit that subscribe button and join our community. Because there are thousands of other silent files in cabinets just like mine, waiting for their own signal, waiting for their story to finally be told. And they all deserve to be heard.